Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is Tahmina Watson, your host of Tahmina Talks Immigration. Welcome. This summer, I decided to record a series called Legal Heroes in the Trump Era. I wanted to speak with some of the lawyers who have stepped up beyond their day jobs to make a difference in immigration, civil rights, and much more. I wanted their insights from their work in the last 4 years so we can learn lessons to take into the future, especially as one of the most consequential elections in America lies ahead. The interview series became a book called Legal Heroes in the Trump Era. Be inspired, expand your impact, change the world. The book can be found on Amazon and other outlets. I hope you will pick it up. Enjoy these interviews. I hope you'll learn a lot. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you for being here. Welcome, everyone. This is Tahmina Watson for Tahmina Talks Immigration. It's a beautiful sunny day here in Seattle, and I have an amazing guest to go with the beautiful weather that we have too. Her name is Michele Storms, and she is the Executive Director of the ACLU Washington State. Welcome, Michele. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, I've known you for such a long time, and I'm just grateful to have been inspired by everything that you've done, since I met you. But I would love our listeners and viewers to get to know you a little bit more before I ask you these legal hero questions. You are part of this legal hero series I'm doing, and you're just going to be inspiring. I know it as we speak. Where were you born, and where did you grow up?
So, Tahmina, I was born in San Francisco, California, and that's where I grew up, in that wonderful, beautiful city by the bay.
What a great state that is. It's leading the charge in the country for all the progressive needs that we have. So did you always want to be a lawyer?
Actually, Tahmina, I did not. In fact, I had no intention of becoming a lawyer. I didn't know any lawyers, and all I knew about lawyers was what I saw on TV, which was either prosecutors in criminal cases or big firms. And none of that seemed interesting to me. So friends of mine who said they wanted to be lawyers, I was like, well, that's not interesting at all. And so that's where I started.
Wow. And so then what happened? What's your journey to law school?
Right. Well, obviously something happened. So here's what happened. I grew up in a family that was very committed to community service. And so I was always active in community service. And a lot of that was born out of coming from a family that had often had to receive services. And so it was absolutely about giving back. In gratitude for what we had received as the family had moved and come out of poverty and done many different things. And so this was my backdrop. I was really studying to be in the film and television industry, but always doing community service. And then I had a kind of a transformational event happen in my life, which was that I had chosen to spend some time living and working in a homeless shelter. And it was a shelter for families and children. And because I was there basically 24/7, I was constantly interacting with the families who were our residents, cooking dinner with folks, being with folks, talking to them. And the more I talked directly with individuals who we were living with, the more I realized how sharp and awful injustices were, because none of these folks had done anything wrong, but all kinds of wrong had been done to them. And as a result, they had no place to be. And so I began to get very passionate about what could I do to make a difference in this space. And then people started to tell me about civil legal aid. And so I'd never heard of it. So I started investigating civil legal aid. And I thought, well, if that's who works on these issues, this is what I have to do. And if the only way I can do that is to go to law school and be a lawyer, then I'm going to go to law school and be a lawyer. And that is literally how I became a lawyer.
Wow, I just got goosebumps. And how relevant that particular story is for today when homelessness is such
Oh,
a pandemic
so true.
essentially in this country. So,
Mhm,
what an interesting background to have so you can use that for all the things you do now. And
mhm.
so, you went to law school, you became a lawyer, and then tell us a little bit about your career up to today.
Sure. So I was very fortunate to get a civil legal aid job out of law school, and I started my career here in Seattle, Washington. So my goal was to be a civil legal aid attorney. I'm from California. I applied for jobs all over the country because I said, whoever will take me, that's where I'm going to go and make my career. And so Seattle, an organization that no longer exists called Evergreen Legal Services, hired me for my first lawyer job. So I started to be a civil legal aid attorney here in Seattle.
Lucky for
Uh,
us.
yeah, and lucky for me too, because it was really a remarkable place to work. And, I know that you're aware that the access to justice community in Washington state is so strong and so organized and so committed and so strategic. And so to grow up as a baby lawyer in that context was really incredibly shaping of how my whole career has unfolded. But I did actually originally represented many domestic violence survivors. In fact, I think I first met you through Chaya, through the auctions, because you used to volunteer with Chaya, and I would go to their events, and because
That's
I done
true.
right, so I had
Yeah,
done so
yeah.
much domestic violence work over many years. So anyway, I did that for quite a bit of time, and then. Um, in legal aid, we're always trying to think about how to build capacity. And so I collaborated and coordinated with private sector lawyers, with law schools, with clinics, and all of these things. And then University of Washington Law School was growing its clinical program and wanted to do more family law domestic violence. And so I applied for that job. So that's how I first started teaching. So I taught in the clinical program there for about 8 years. At that time, also an opportunity arose, and I started what was then the Child Advocacy Clinic. And we began doing child welfare cases, representing teenagers in foster care, representing guardians ad litem, and did that for a good little while. Really learned a lot and loved it. I especially loved the opportunity to help law students see how they could be doing public service regardless of what their ultimate career choice might be. But I ended up going back to legal aid because that's where my heart was. And I became a statewide advocacy coordinator, working all over the state on youth issues, education issues, housing issues, Native American rights, exploring civil right to counsel on a statewide basis, working with several different organizations in the state of Washington to, again, keep building capacity, strengthen our ability to address one of the other pandemics, which is poverty. There's so
Hmm.
many, right? And did that for a period of time. And then when the University of Washington Law School started the Gates Public Service Law Program, I thought, oh, this is a great way to be back at the law school, which I had enjoyed, but to be super laser focused on public interest law, and how I've always felt that law is kind of this closed field, right? Like you have uh, to practice law, you have to be a lawyer. And yet, we also know that so many people have legal needs and don't get assistance. And whether those are individual needs or big ticket needs, like the civil rights and civil liberties things that we'll talk about in a minute, this has been my passion completely within the law. And so coming back into that space, I was like, let me run that program and get all the law students completely trained up and ready to go and energized and thoughtful about how to make a difference as lawyers in their careers. So I actually did that for 10 years. I built up an entire new Center for Public Service Law at the University of Washington Law School, and just saw just hundreds of students through the programs during that period of time, which I am so proud of. And then I was really feeling the need to be back doing the work again and trying to figure out, okay, what will that look like for me? And then I heard about the former deputy director at the ACLU of Washington leaving, and some people encouraged me to apply. And so that was in 2016.
What
And
month would you
uh,
say that was in
well,
2016?
the month I actually started was September. So what I was thinking
Mm.
about was I applied in the summer, and you will remember in the summer of 2016, of course, there were all the presidential debates. We had our two presidential nominees, and the ACLU had done something very smart. The national office had really compiled a dossier on both of the candidates. What would be the civil rights and civil liberties challenges under either one of these candidates? And certainly for both of them, there would be challenges. But for one, it felt like there might be more challenges than the other. And I remember thinking to myself, if this person wins, maybe everything will be fine, and maybe there will be a lot of real challenges under civil rights and civil liberties, and being at the ACLU would be exactly the right place to be. So that's
Wow. Wow, what foresight that was, both for ACLU and for you. Because the reason I asked about the month is because my next question really is, where were you November 2016 when the election happened? We can
right.
all remember it as if it were 9/11, and we could probably remember our emotions as if it were yesterday. So where were you, and what was going through your mind?
Absolutely. So I had been at the ACLU for about 7 whole weeks. And as you will recall, there were a lot of people who felt very convinced that our next president would be Hillary Clinton. I actually was not so optimistic about that. And so I do remember election night very well. I was actually at an election night event for Pramila Jayapal, who, as you know, became our first South Asian congresswoman. So exciting. And hearing the news on so many of the different issues that night, and feeling just a little bit of a knot in the stomach, like what's ahead for us? Because if I may fast forward, like I said, the president is one who says a lot of things. And so, I didn't, and some of those things that he said during the campaign trail were really troubling, especially on the immigration front, which I know is the work that you're so passionate about. But, we didn't know, well, what will really actually happen? But January, we found out very quickly, right? Very quickly, we found out what was actually going to happen.
So when the election happened and you at and ACLU in general was sort of thinking about what kind of civil liberties would be under attack, what did you do between November and January, would you say? Was there any planning that happened? I mean, nobody could have predicted the enormous assaults that we've been seeing right from the get-go. So none of us could have really been prepared, but there was some preparation that some people have done. What was going through your mindset? You've been 7 weeks at ACLU, you're still getting, used to it, but now you've got, basically about 8 to 10 weeks to prepare. And what happened next after the election?
Do you know, it's a little bit of a blur in my memory, I'm not going to lie. And I think part of the reason it's a blur is because when everything had to kick into action, we got going. But I am sure that what did happen is that we were being very thoughtful. I remember we began to think about, at the ACLU at that time, we did not have an immigration specialist on staff. And so we started thinking about, we'd probably better have one. I mean, we had people who understood immigration law, but immigration is really a specialty, right? So one of the things that we did was begin to think, we're probably going to need to hire an immigration specialist. So I know that we did that. I think we were prepared. One of the other areas where there was a lot of concern was related to reproductive justice. And so I know our specialist in that area was doing a lot of coordinating with other experts around the country and trying to get ready for what we might need to be prepared for there. Certainly out of the New York office, they were a literal beehive of activity in preparation and regrouping. I remember we would have a lot of conversations at the local and national level about the Supreme Court and what to expect there. I think that the ACLU had a number of cases lined up with an expectation of a different court than we have right now. And so the regrouping was really, if we can't bring these matters in front of a Supreme Court because of a concern of who the jurists are and what we might get, what are our other options? We also started thinking about state courts versus federal courts more generally. In Washington state, we just have a wonderful judiciary. We have such a strong and progressive state Supreme Court. And so we're thinking that might be in Washington, the better place for us to do more litigation, because things going to federal court, we knew that the judiciary there was going to change and might not change in a very good direction for civil rights and civil liberties.
Yeah, well, Dil, let's take a moment to say thank you to the leading judges that we have in our state and the leaders. I mean, we have had tremendous leadership from the governor to the attorney general to our congressional delegation to
Mm-hmm.
our judiciary, and we are a shining example of what a state can be, because we have to, protect the people in our state, and our leaders have shown the rest of the country, what that should look like. So we're so grateful. So I want to dive into a little bit of the issues that you have been, challenging. And I know immigration obviously is one of the biggest ones, because as the travel ban had come and hit us in January, ACLU had partnered with many organizations. Give us a summary. I mean, we can't go through everything. Give us a summary of some of the issues that you as ACLU and under your leadership has been tackled, both nationally but statewide too. I mean, there have been lots of different issues that have come up, so, something like the Greyhound buses, for example.
Oh, absolutely. So, well, let's start with immigration. As I mentioned, that January of 2017, things really got off to a wild start with that weekend that I will never in all my life forget, when all of us, you were there, we were all at the airport trying to figure out what to do. We were collaborating with the Northwest Immigrants' Rights Project and trying to get some gentlemen to not get sent back because of the Muslim travel ban. There were some issues arising at the Canadian border as well. We ended up filing a lawsuit here in Washington that related to refugees. And some of the other lawsuits were covering other different topics, but we had noticed, and we had clients who had been prepared to bring their families over, because as you know better than I do, in refugee law, there's that follow to join, right? So they had gone through the whole process to be able, our main client from Somalia, his family had been in refugee camps in Kenya for quite some time, and they were ready to come, and then they couldn't come because of the ban. And so we realized that this was something that was impacting many, many families, where all the paperwork and all the medical visits and all the things that you have to do, there's so much. So we filed a lawsuit about that, which was actually very successful. It only just resolved quite recently, but has allowed for so many families to be reunited, and we're so grateful for that. But you're right, you mentioned Greyhound. Under this administration, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, and Customs and Border Patrol, CBP, have really been empowered and emboldened to take pretty extraordinary steps. So the Customs and Border Patrol were boarding buses, the Greyhound buses in Spokane, on a complete domestic route, so nobody's going to Canada or Mexico or anything. It was basically like Yakima to Missoula, Montana, or something like that. And they were getting on the buses and asking people to show their papers, which is so disturbing. It's reminiscent of apartheid South Africa, right, where people were required to carry papers, but we don't have a requirement to carry papers here in the United States. So obviously very frightening for people, very threatening. And of course, they were specifically asking people with brown skin who weren't speaking English. So we took action on that. That is still ongoing. And then I think the other thing in the immigration space has really been the attempts for this administration to engage more deeply with domestic law enforcement, with just regular police. And so our specialist has worked really hard to first to get police agencies not to collaborate. And then, of course, as you know, we passed through our legislature the Keep Washington Working Act, which now makes it clear in no uncertain terms there is not to be that collaboration. So it's helpful. People can just live their lives and go to work and pay their taxes and do all the things that immigrants do and citizens do, right? Without that harassment. Reproductive justice issues, I mentioned that before, that continues to be a concern. There have been numerous rules put out at the federal level under this administration to attempt to limit access to a full range of maternal and family care. And there have been rules put out limiting care for lesbian, gay, trans people. And we at the ACLU, both locally and nationally, have been fighting on that front. Another really critical area of work for us has been in the criminal legal system, where there's such a need for reform. And that has not changed under this administration. We continue to incarcerate way too many people. So we do work related to bail reform, sentencing reform. We really want to see Washington State, while beautifully progressive in many ways, actually has sentencing laws that are quite punitive, and that between 3 strikes and locking people up for extraordinarily long periods of time. And where it is most troubling, of course, is when we lock up people who are 16, 17, 18 years old for these 20, 30, 40-year sentences. And we're talking about people whose brains literally have not finished developing. And so that is a big piece of our work as well. And of course, right now, with the COVID pandemic, getting people out of prison, jail, and out of immigration detention has become ever more critical, because it is just a breeding ground for sickness, for virus. And right now, I know at Coyote Ridge, there's a major outbreak of COVID-19 there. There have been COVID-19 cases at Monroe State Prison. Those are the ones that I know the most. Oh, and then at a juvenile facility, it happened in some youth homes. And so what happens is we have all these people in tight spaces. They cannot physically distance. Hand sanitizer has alcohol in it, so it's contraband, and so they can't even use that on a regular basis or anything to keep their surfaces clean. So it's just terrifying to think about. And we've done, since COVID-19, we've done a huge amount of work to try to get jails to release people who really are only there because they couldn't pay bail, or for prisons to release people who are already near their time of coming out, of being released, or who are elderly and vulnerable. So we've had some success with that, which I'm very pleased about, especially at the jails level. We've had great success. There's more I can say. I feel like I've just
I'm
been
sure.
talking and talking, so I want to stop.
No, this is so interesting. And staying on the criminal front of it all, of course, just recently you filed a lawsuit so that police would not use tear gas. And that was just literally last week or the week before, given all the protests we've seen around the country.
Mm-hmm.
And so thank you for fighting the fight, because, it's the little people, it's all of us that are in our communities and societies that need the protection given by the law. And if lawyers don't use it because it's being abused by those in power, then we would be losing essentially the rule of law. And from your perspective, why are these fights important today?
Well, they're vitally important today. And if I could just say one thing more about that lawsuit that you just referenced. We keep talking about all the pandemics, and one of America's original pandemics is racism. And the way that shows up in policing is becoming ever more evident to people, particularly after what happened to George Floyd, which was nothing short of torture. And so people have been taking to the streets. Now, the other most original American thing that there is the right to protest, is the right to say something is happening that's not right, is the right to say that government is being too heavy-handed, literally has its knee on our neck. And standing up for that is what the ACLU was absolutely founded for. And in this moment, when people are recognizing the harms that have been faced by Black people, by Black Indigenous people of color, that by vulnerable people, where we also see state violence often is against people with disabilities, as people are more and more cognizant that, no, this isn't just a random thing, this is a deeply embedded problem, people are speaking out. And so people need to be able to do that. and to think about what public safety means to them. So we filed that lawsuit because people were being harmed, because the tear gas and other chemical weapons, rubber bullets, which are actually incredibly dangerous, were being fired on crowds in situations that we believe did not call for it.
Did you, I don't know if you know, but one of the people who almost died that day, had to be resuscitated 3 times, was my assistant. She had just joined.
Oh
And,
my goodness, I
and
did not know that.
she was
Oh,
my assistant. And so that week was actually quite a, you know, troubling one for all of us. She didn't turn up at work on Monday. We didn't know what happened. And slowly her mum called and the doctors called, and we, you know, found out what happened. And of course she couldn't work soon thereafter because, you know, who can? You practically died 3 times, you know, they literally had to resuscitate her 3 times.
oh, I'm so sorry. And she's better now, I hope.
She is better, yes,
Oh, thank
thankfully.
goodness.
I mean,
And
yes,
that's to
health.
your point.
Physically, she's better. I mean, I don't know
Right.
what this does to one's psyche.
Well, it doesn't do anything good to your psyche. And I think that's to your point, that any person, you know, I think sometimes people have this idea that the people who are protesting are folks who don't have jobs, or just, you know, they get cast with this broad brush as being radicals. And your assistant, this person who works in your law office, nurses and doctors and students and elderly people, you know, just people who want to make the point, please, we need change. We need change, and we want to work for change. And that is, you know, how this country was founded, people who wanted to have change and fought for it. And so this is why these fights are so very, very important. All of our rights, all the things that the Constitution promised us, even though when it was written, it was only sort of meant to apply to a select few, we embrace that it must apply to every single one of us, regardless of our color, our gender, or whoever we are, however we present. That freedom is the essence of what we need to be as Americans, as people living on this soil. And that is what we are fighting for. And yeah.
Wow, well said. So, would you call this legal activism? Would you call this activism?
I mean, it's funny. I don't think of it that way, but I guess it really is. Uh, you know, law feels like such a staid institution, and you know, you have you know, you go to law school and you get called on Ms. Watson. Um, but in reality, what for me to be a lawyer is to be an activist. What is the Charles Hamilton Houston quote about being a lawyer as a social engineer? Lawyer as the one who, through the law, through changing the law or enforcing the law, creates the society that we want for everyone. And so in these days in particular, with COVID-19, with racism, with all the things that we've been talking about, lawyers can bring a special, can bring the special tool of the law to try to make change for the better for everyone so that we can all live free. Mm-hmm.
And then a follow-up question to that, would you say in the last 3 years, legal activism has evolved? You know, we've always had lawyers step up for what's
Mm-hmm.
right, from, you know, that's why we have Roe and Wade and all these other issues. But
Sure.
would you say there was a shift in the last 3 years?
I would say yes. I would say people have gotten pretty laser focused on making sure that we can preserve democracy and preserve our rights. We have had so many volunteer attorneys come to us, I think really quite a few more than had in years past. Like the ACLU has always had volunteers, right? Of course, because it's a great place to be aligned with and to work with. But really, we've had a lot of people come to us and say, we will help in whatever way. I think the same is true of the National Lawyers Guild. People are interested in using the skills and tools that we have as lawyers to fight for freedom and for rights.
Well, I'm so glad you brought up volunteers, because one of the things that a part of this series is to showcase people like yourselves who have opened up the doors for people to use their legal skills.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, a lot of us, you know, pre 2016 would be generally transactional. And suddenly we realize, you know, those idealisms that we had going to law school are now, you know, so very important. We have to go back to that. And I think that's been an awakening in lawyers, for you to say that you've had so many lawyers, you know, come and volunteer. I think every organization probably could say that. And I,
Yes.
you know, and I definitely can say that's why the nonprofit I started was started, because
Mm-hmm.
there were lots of lawyers who wanted to do work in immigration, but they didn't have the skills. But if somebody guides them, it's possible. So I'm so glad you brought that up, because it confirms the legal activism and legal awakening of lawyers. What guidance would you give to lawyers who haven't necessarily stepped up and they're thinking about it? How can they get involved?
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, uh, let me just back up for a moment. The nonprofit that you started, so I'm so proud of you and so grateful that you did that, because you're exactly right. Lawyers wanted to help and they had no idea how to do it. And so you created a space to make that possible. And one of the things that we do, because a lot of people do come to us, we will often say, here are other places where you could go, that you could also be supportive and engage with the local county bar associations and the state bar, with organizations like yours, with Northwest Immigrants' Rights Project, Columbia Legal Services, Northwest Justice Project, and so on. So I think a couple of things. Do your research as to what it is that you think you could do, where you could be helpful. And if you want to work in an area that you haven't worked in before, think about some CLEs and help us to be able to use you better, right? Also, I would, especially in these times, you know, I really want to encourage people to read and think about the history of our country, the history of racism and in our country, and nativism in our country, and understand, because when people want to do immigration work or do the criminal legal work, I think it's helpful for, or even work with protesters, to understand the context in which people find themselves in need and why that is, and try to have a deeper understanding of that. So I think, you know, reading books like How to Be Anti-Racist, right, by Dr. Kendi, or So You Want to Talk About Race. And I'm sure you could probably name some titles that would be great for people to think about in terms of the history of immigration, because it's wonderful to help and we want the help. I think you can be even more helpful when you have some context and appreciation and understanding for what people are going through. And you can't ever completely know, right? Because you can't be in that person's shoes, but you can try to understand, because people are suffering,
Yeah,
you know?
very much so. And I will add Just Mercy. I haven't read the books you
Oh,
mentioned. They're on
yes,
my
it's so
list.
good. It's
But
such a good book.
just Mercy, I actually just read it, you know, I want to say in the
Mhm,
last 6 months before all of
mhm,
this blew up. But
mhm,
it's so eye-opening. You mentioned earlier where a person's brain hasn't developed, yet they're incarcerated basically for the rest of their life, might as well be. And Just
mhm.
Mercy really does give such a compelling, heart-wrenching
Mhm,
perspective of what happens on the ground, and how he
mhm,
was like, I can't help everybody, this is what I have to do. And you know, if there's one book people will read, I mean, to me, I mean, I haven't read the others, I would definitely recommend that one. But of
mhm.
course there's a movie now, but I would
Yes.
still recommend people read the book, because when
Mhm,
you are creating a movie, which I'm sure is fantastic, you don't necessarily get all the little nuances that have been mentioned in the book, because a movie has to be created to serve a purpose so that you don't miss anything. And
and to
some of
end in 2 hours.
and end in 2 hours. So, yeah. Well, you know, Michele, you are truly an inspiration. I'm so glad you had the foresight to get into position to lead the fight for all of us and be a beacon of hope on every issue that is basically coming up. And there's been no shortage of it. You know, we've been kept in shock after shock after shock. And so, for people like you who are leading without having a break, the only thing I would say is thank you, so much gratitude, and keep doing what you're doing, but please also take care of yourself. So thank you so much for being here. And thank you also for mentioning and saying thank you for my nonprofit. You know, I'm very proud of it. We haven't done as much as I would love to have done, but we've done some, and that's good. Yeah. Well,
Well,
thank you.
Thank you so much. And I really appreciate you having these conversations and letting us all be inspired. And you inspire me
Oh,
as well. So just
thank
keep
you.
up the good work. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Tahmina Talks is brought to you by Watson Immigration Law. Founded in 2009, Watson Immigration Law is one of Seattle's premier immigration firms, specializing in business and investment visas, but offering a wide range of immigration services. If you need assistance with your immigration needs, Watson Immigration Law is ready to help. Just call 206-292-5237 to schedule an appointment. Mention this podcast to receive a 10% discount off your initial consultation fee.